keep admitting people, Marina, if I see anybody else join.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Ashley. Okay, let me share my screen here. Excellent. Well, we can jump on in and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the call today. My name is Marina Tomer, and I work in the Maine Office of Community Affairs in the State Resilience Office. I support the Community Resilience Partnership and manage the Service Provider Grant Program and also the Regional Coordinator Program. Thanks again for joining this webinar today about the Service Provider Grant Program Statement. If you're here for the Community Action Grant webinar, that's actually going to be taking place later today at 3:00 p.m. This session is just specifically focused on the Service Provider Grant Program. I'm joined today by Ashley Krulik, the Community Resilience Partnership Program Manager. If you have any Zoom difficulties, Ashley and I will be monitoring the chat during the presentations and also during our Q&A period after. So please pop in a note and we'll try to help you out. We ask that you please remain on mute unless you're invited to speak so we can limit the background noise. We're very excited to be announcing our 7th round of service provider grants. Since its launch, the Community Resilience Partnership has awarded over $20 million in grants for climate resilience and emissions reduction initiatives in communities across all of Maine's 16 counties. Today, we have 298 communities that are participating in the program, and we're more than halfway towards our goal that was set in the 2024 Climate Action Plan and updated to have 80% of Maine communities participating in the partnership by 2030, which is super exciting. We really want to thank all of the service providers and the regional coordinators and the communities, of course, who have been involved in the partnership, who really helped us get to this point today and who do the work to continue to reach the state's climate action goals. We definitely could not do this all without you. So thank you so much for your partnership. Okay, so for today's agenda, we'll start by briefly reviewing Maine's climate goals, and we'll talk a bit about the Community Resilience Partnership. And then after that, we'll provide a brief overview of the enrollment process, followed by some details about the service provider grant opportunity and the application process. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll take any questions that you might have. So please pop those in the chat as we're going along, and we'll get to those towards the end. So some background on Maine's climate goals. Maine has several important climate goals that this program directly helps to support. The first are our emissions reduction targets, which are established in state law, reducing emissions 45% below 1990 levels by 2030, and then 80% below 1990 levels by 2050. The governor has also established a goal to achieve carbon neutrality in the state by 2045. The state also has a goal to ensure that our people, industries, and communities are resilient to the impacts of climate change, which we're all already experiencing. And then in November of 2024, the Maine Climate Council released the state's updated 4-year action plan called Maine Won't Wait. And this updated plan builds on Maine's success in addressing climate change, as well as recommendations and strategies to advance the state's work in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, achieving carbon neutrality, strengthening Maine's resilience to the impacts of climate change, and growing Maine's economy through new green jobs. And the Community Resilience Partnership Program is really a key implementation activity of this plan. The state has 4 core goals: reducing greenhouse gas emissions, strengthening resilience to climate impacts, creating jobs and economic prosperity. As we know, many of the strategies in the plan can create jobs and build new industries in Maine. And then finally, the last one is focused on bringing climate action to all Maine people. Maine Won't Wait has 7 different strategies covering our greatest sources of emissions, as well as ways that our state can become more resilient to climate change. And those are all listed here, and they include reducing transportation and building emissions, transitioning to clean energy, job creation to grow Maine's economy, protecting our environment, preparing Maine communities for climate impacts, and investing in critical infrastructure, as well as engaging people to understand the different challenges of climate impacts and the opportunities to take action. The Community Resilience Partnership supports Maine's climate goals by providing grants and technical assistance to aid communities in Maine to reduce carbon emissions, transition to clean energy, and become more resilient to the effects of climate change, including extreme weather, flooding, rising sea levels, public health impacts, and many more. And this map here on the right is updated to show all of the enrolled communities and participating communities. The Community Resilience Partnership plans to allocate approximately $4.6 million for community action grants during this grant round. A portion of this funding comes from federal sources and might carry additional federal requirements, such as environmental review. And Ashley will talk more about that later on during the Community Action Grant webinar. The partnership plans to allocate approximately $600,000 for service provider grant awards in Track 1 and Track 2 during this grant round. For both Tracks 1 and Tracks 2, applicants may request up to $15,000 per community in their group. A little bit more about the service provider grant. These grants support organizations to assist communities with climate action, energy and resilience planning, and we're offering 2 service provider grant tracks again for this round. So Track 1 is focused on the enrollment of new communities in the partnership and application for community action grant funding, whereas Track 2 supports the development of community vulnerability assessments and application for community action grant funding. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on what really differentiates Track 1 from Track 2. Something important to note that's new this cycle is that instead of having a single due date for the service provider grant, we'll now be having 4 different submission deadlines for the service provider grants within this round 7 cycle. And those will occur in May, August, November, and March. And this change is really designed to better support communities by providing more flexible entry points. And we'll talk more about this later on. Any organization may apply to both tracks in this grant round, but may only submit 1 application per track per cycle. Similarly, a community may participate in both tracks, but may only be included in 1 application per track per cycle. So to say that in a different way, if you're applying for, a community to do a vulnerability assessment for the first cycle in May, you can then apply in August for, 2 more communities. So you can keep applying within that cycle. Track 1 service provider grants are available to organizations who recruit groups of up to 5 different communities to join the partnership. This recruitment is to be done as part of developing a service provider grant application. Please note that there's no longer a requirement to have at least 2 communities participate in the service provider grant program. Service providers will assist the groups of communities to conduct a robust community engagement process that really sets them up for implementing projects on the list of community actions, as well as helping them to apply for community action grants or other potential funding opportunities to move forward and really implement those priorities. The outcomes that we're looking for with Track 1 are, first, the new enrollment by each of the communities in the group. Second is a list of priority activities for each of the communities and a list of potential collaborative projects among several or all of the communities in the group. And then third is assistance to the communities in applying for community action grants or potentially other funding sources that fit their needs. So I'm going to talk a little bit about enrolling. This is the first outcome that we're looking for as part of Track 1. So we'll spend a little bit of time talking about the enrollment process and what that looks like. Step 1 is completing the 2 self-assessments that will help the community really sort of do an overview and take stock of the activities that are already underway, and then identify potential next steps. So the first is a list of community actions, which now contain 95 activities that align with Maine Won't Wait strategies. This list was updated last year to include some more actions that align with recommendations from the 2024 Maine Won't Wait update, and includes additional funding materials to support things like waste management and land use planning. We also made some minor changes to this list of actions in February. There's no new actions that are included, but we did include some additional resources and some notes based on frequently asked questions that we've received. So please be sure that you're checking out that most updated February 2026 version of the actions, and that's of course linked on the website and in the program statement. During the enrollment period, the community should go through the list and check off all the activities that have been completed and make note of activities that they want to prioritize moving forward. The second self-assessment is the Community Resilience Self-Evaluation, which is a questions-based tool that's intended to help communities think through important topics like updating their hazard mitigation practices or doing things like thinking about how climate intersects with socioeconomics and community finances. Both of these assessments will enable communities to really sort of get this snapshot of where they're at in time on their resilience process and sort of chart a path forward for next steps. So the service providers may need to do some help with communities in that process. Maybe you're sort of serving as this extra set of expertise in energy or resilience matters, or providing that hands-on assistance as they work through these different assessments and answering questions that they might have that come up in the process. Step 2 involves holding a community workshop to review the results of the 2 assessments and then to set the priorities for action in the near term. The workshop doesn't need to be a sort of full-blown climate planning workshop, although it could be, and the communities might decide to move forward with that process. But the criteria for the workshop really is that there's participation by community groups who may be most vulnerable to climate impacts, and that through that process, it produces a list of around half a dozen or so priority activities to focus on for the next several years. So really identifying what those key priorities are and where the community wants to go. And again, service providers, your role here is helping the communities convene and facilitate these workshops and helping them sort of work through and identify those different opportunities for collaboration and thinking through those next steps. And then step 3 in the process is passing a municipal resolution or obtaining a letter of support from a tribal chief that's committing to being involved in the partnership. And we provide model language for the resolution on our website, so you can take that language and include that. If the community is a township, plantation, or an unorganized territory, there's a few different alternatives that you may want to think about, and we also have examples of that. Step 4 is the last step, and that's submitting all the enrollment materials. And you do that through an online portal, and that's available through the partnership website. And service providers can also help with that process and even submit on behalf of the community if they need assistance with that. And communities can enroll at any time, including simultaneously with a community action grant application. All right, so now switching gears here a bit, we're going to move on to track 2 of the service provider grant. And track 2 is available to organizations who recruit groups of up to 5 communities to complete the community vulnerability assessments. This recruitment is to be done as part of the grant application as well. And here we included a new definition of vulnerability assessments, which we define as a community-informed process where the community works to identify priority climate risks and vulnerable assets, and then produces a prioritized and actionable set of recommendations to guide future community resilience planning and investment. So the goal with this sort of track 2 vulnerability assessment really is to help communities understand where climate-related risks are, where they intersect with their valued community assets, and then prioritize different areas of concern, and then identify actionable strategies and resources that are needed to increase resilience. For this track, the outcomes are a bit different. Here, we're looking for the service providers to work with up to 5 enrolled communities and then complete the community vulnerability assessment that meets our program requirements, which are all outlined in the program statement. And as you read through that, you'll see that includes things like identifying the common goals the community has to actually conduct the assessment, identifying potential hazards, thinking about those community assets and what the relative risk is to these different assets from different hazards. And the goal here is really to develop a prioritized set of actionable recommendations to increase resilience and decrease vulnerability. We also ask that you clearly distinguish between near-term actions and more medium and long-term actions. And then once that assessment is complete, the service provider should provide that assessment back to the communities in seeking a community action grant or other funding opportunities that directly tie back to those key vulnerabilities that were identified as part of this process. All right, so both service provider grant tracks include assistance to communities to apply for community action grants. Community action grants are intended to produce both one of 2 possible outcomes, and that includes reducing community or regional emissions, as well as improving community resilience to climate change impacts. In some cases, community action grant funds may be used as match for federal grant funds or for larger projects. And to be eligible for community action grants, the applicant must be a municipality or a federally recognized tribe in Maine. Townships, plantations, and unorganized territories are also eligible for community action grants, but they might likely need that external support and assistance that can be provided by a service provider. The community must be enrolled in the partnership or submit a new enrollment simultaneously with their grant application. And regional planning organizations may also apply for community action grants on behalf of smaller towns or lower capacity communities, but those communities must be enrolled in the partnership also and should supply letters of commitment as part of that application process. And the service provider is really expected to assist the communities with developing and writing a grant proposal as needed by the community. And again, later on today, Ashley's session will provide a lot more details about questions you might have related to the community action grants. Talking a little bit more about eligibility, eligible entities for service provider grants include regional planning organizations, councils of government, city governments, nonprofits, universities, and consultants. And then in special cases, a municipality may apply for a service provider grant to assist a neighboring community to enroll and to help them with like prioritization of projects and applying for funding. But this is really important that the municipality demonstrates robustness in their own in-house capacity and expertise to be able to extend those services to nearby communities. We also note that strong applications will show that service providers have the expertise and experience to provide this assistance for communities related to climate and resilience and energy reduction. Partnerships are encouraged also among organizations that can bring complementary expertise to the application. Now getting into some more details about the service provider grant awards. So for this cycle, applicants can request up to $15,000 per community in the group. A 15% match is required of the organization and in-kind is allowed. Additional points in the scoring criteria process will be added for communities that have a population of below 4,000 or for communities that are in high social vulnerability categories according to the Maine Social Vulnerability Index. And we have a link to that index in the program statement. If you want to pull that up, you can search for your community and find where they stand on the vulnerability index. In terms of a timeline, Track 1 grants is expected to be completed within 12 months. And then we allow some additional time for Track 2 because those processes are typically more involved. So those need to be complete within 18 months. And then all program tracks must be fully complete within a maximum period of 24 months. I'll touch here on our new quarterly submission process. So instead of a single review date, as I mentioned, we now have 4 different submission windows for round 7. Those are in May, August, November, and March, and you can see those specific dates listed here. And this change is really designed to better support communities by providing more flexible entry points. So the idea here is that when communities are ready to enroll and when they're ready to get started and conduct a vulnerability assessment, they don't have to wait, 8-9 months to engage in that process or for the single deadline to occur. This way, there's sort of always this upcoming opportunity to apply and get started in a more timely manner that aligns better with the community needs. Awards will be made on a rolling basis as funding is available and will remain subject to our annual program funding limit. Please note that the CRP will close the service provider grant round once the total funding limit for the cycle has been reached. So if we run out of funds for this early, we will close that application open. But if you see it open, there's still funding available and opportunities to apply within this window. And again, this updated approach is really to improve access, reduce delays, and better align funding availability with community readiness for project timelines. The tasks for the service provider grant, there's a number of different tasks that we expect as part of the grant application. First task is recruiting up to 5 communities and providing letters of support for each. It's strongly encouraged to seek letters from municipal officials or town councils and select boards. Once the grant is awarded, the other task is to assist the community in the group with completing the enrollment or community vulnerability assessment program deliverables. Any work that is done by the community or the service provider prior to the service provider grant is not eligible for funding. So we have to make sure work is started within that period once the grant funds are distributed. The next task is assisting communities in the group with applying for community action grants or other funding opportunities for priority actions. So it doesn't necessarily have to be community action grants. If there's other grants that are really well aligned with community priorities, you can seek those out and help the community with that application process as well. And then finally, MOCA does require quarterly updates and project deliverables and a brief case study on the lessons learned. And I'll be sending reminders out of when those are due, and we'll have a specific template that hopefully makes it easier for you to just put in those updates for us. The service provider is not expected to actually help the community implement any of the prioritized actions that are part of the service provider grant period sort of assessment phase. Although the partnership between communities and service provider is one that, in theory could be extended, past the life of the community action grant, the focus really of the service provider grant is to support communities in that planning and assessment stage. So conducting the vulnerability assessment, facilitating the enrollment steps, helping the community identify their prioritized actions. So that way the community can be well positioned to actually move forward and implement when ready. I wanted to highlight the Maine Social Vulnerability Index here. We mentioned it earlier, that additional scoring points are possible for recruiting higher needs communities. The Social Vulnerability Index is a tool that's used by our grant program to help identify where vulnerable communities are and what factors contribute to those vulnerabilities. So this tool was updated in 2024, and it uses census data from 2020. Please note that additional funding for this grant is not associated with recruiting communities in these categories. However, we do allocate higher points in the review process to communities that are in the higher vulnerability components of this index. This again is intended really to incentivize applicants to engage with higher need communities and to help ensure that the program directs funds where they're most needed and can have the greatest impact. Please use the link to this index in the program statement or on the partnership website to look into your community and figure out where you are in the vulnerability index. Okay, so this is my sort of catch-all slide. If you weren't paying attention, this is the time to pay attention. It kind of highlights all the new things that are important to note. The first is that the total amount of funding available for service provider grants this round is $600,000. And we anticipate that this will support approximately between 12 and 20 awards. Service providers can request up to $15,000 per community in their group. This year, we're having quarterly submission deadlines or cycles for both tracks within round 7. So there's 4 different opportunities to engage and receive funding. There's no minimum number of communities for either tracks. And track 1 is expected to be completed within a year and track 2 within 18 months. And then finally, please refer to the updated list of community actions that align with those new Maine won't wait recommendations and include some additional best practices and notes. All right, we just wanted to wrap up here with some considerations for applicants. First, we do recommend that strong applicants show that their service provider has the experience and the expertise to provide this assistance to complete the objectives that are associated with the track for the grant they're applying for. We do encourage partnerships that can really bring sort of complementary expertise as part of the application. Next, please be sure that the communities you bring into your application have a full understanding of what they're getting themselves into and all of the program requirements involved and what their roles would be in this process. So it's important to ask questions like, does the community actually have the staff and the volunteers to engage in this effort? And do they know what's going to be required? Does the town council and select board understand that they'll have to pass a resolution as part of this process? And can you do that within a timely manner? While you will want to communicate these considerations with each community during the grant writing process, you might also consider using letters of support to allow communities to express their role and to emphasize their commitment to being part of this process. Lastly, applicants should describe steps that they'll take to include community members throughout the whole life cycle of the grant and how communities benefit from the implications of this grant. So service providers are expected to design and implement engagement approaches that are inclusive and accessible and responsive to community needs. Next, we'll talk briefly about the application process. As I noted, the next deadline is May 15th. Questions can be submitted to me, and we'll compile all those questions and we'll post them on a rolling basis on the partnership website. The program statement is also found in the partnership website, and the application submission portal is also linked in the statement. All proposals will be submitted through our new MOCO grants portal, which I'll touch on in just a moment. A few more notes here as we wrap up to think about for letters of support. For each of the communities that you intend to assist, they must supply a letter of support as part of your application. The letter should be from a local official or body, such as a town manager or a select board or a tribal chief. And the letters must be signed and dated and be written on community letterhead. And they should be submitted as part of your application package and not sent separately. And we anticipate making initial award notifications at the end of June, depending on the sort of volume of applications that we get. And then for those subsequent grant rounds that we're hosting, we'll make those award notifications roughly a month after the submission deadline. So we're really excited to share that the Maine Office of Community Affairs has launched a new grant portal, and the CRP is now using this for the community action grants and the service provider grants. The portal is powered by the Submittable platform, and there are 4 different programs within MOCA that are using this grant portal. CRP, then we also have Housing Opportunity Program, Municipal Planning and Assistance Program, and the Maine Coastal Program. And a major benefit of having everything in this one portal is that it provides one place to save and manage all of your grant submissions and your reporting. So the goal here is really to create a more streamlined experience that will save you time and create more efficiency, so you're not sort of following 5 different application processes. You have this one-stop shop to submit your grant applications. To get started with Submittable, you'll follow the link in the statement, the program statement. You can also find the link on the CRP website to access the web page. And then from there, you just click apply. You make sure you're clicking the service provider grant because that's separate from the community action grant. That's located on the bottom of the page. And this will prompt you to create a login. And this is where you'll log in to start your application. Something that's really neat about this platform is that it allows for collaborative application. So if you have other folks who are working on this with you, maybe that's community members, maybe it's other staff in your organization, they can work on this with you. The application form saves automatically, so you'll be able to see sort of where they stop and where you can pick up, and have that sort of collaborative platform where you can have multiple people working on one application. And if you have questions or need help, Ashley made a really excellent video tutorial on how to get started, and it walks you through exactly what you need to do for every single step. This is also linked on the grant portal homepage, on our webpage, and within the grant statement. If you have questions that are related to the Submittable platform itself, you can access their frequently asked question page, which is also very helpful, or you can reach out directly to us and we can try our best to help you out. Once the application is ready for submission, you have to hit submit at the end, and we'll receive a notification that the application's been submitted. And then you'll also get via email a confirmation that the application was submitted, so you know it's gone through and we have it. We'll also be providing additional guidance in the coming weeks and months about how you can use Submittable for managing an ongoing award and what that looks like for your process with reporting. We anticipate that the next community action grant round will open in May of 2027, and this round will be open to all enrolled communities, including those who have received prior awards. The last thing we want to highlight here is our regional coordinator network. We currently have 10 regional coordinators who are under multi-year contracts with the partnership, and they're providing ongoing assistance for climate resilience and energy work in communities. The regional coordinators work directly with enrolled communities to prioritize climate actions. They help to develop implementation roadmaps and seek funding to implement actions that communities want to pursue. We highly encourage coordination and collaboration between service providers and the regional coordinators to provide that support and to ensure a smooth transition once the communities are actually enrolled or when your vulnerability assessment process ends and you're working on that sort of grant scoping phase. Regional coordinator information can be found on the partnership website. This is the program that I manage, so if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them and connect you to the coordinator. And here's just a screenshot of our website. I'm sure many of you have spent lots of time here, but here's where you'll find our program statement, any materials that support the enrollment process. So the model municipal resolution language, the 2 self-assessments that are required as part of track 1, the social vulnerability index, and the online enrollment forms are all going to be found there. We also have there a list of interested service providers that's been recently updated if you want to see which service providers are available to connect with as well. And then lastly, I wanted to plug our upcoming Lunch and Learn Network, which is starting next week. This is a webinar series over the next several weeks that we're hosting leading up to the round 7 grant application deadline. Each one is focused on a different aspect of community resilience and features communities that have successfully implemented CRP supported projects. And we'll also be hearing from state programs that support this work as well, and they'll be sharing best practices and resources around these topics. So our first one is on mobilizing volunteers. Then we'll have a session on waste diversion and circular economy. And then we'll talk about vulnerability assessments and flood resilience. And then we'll have an energy focused session on powering resilient communities. So for each of these sessions, we'll walk through how communities have identified the priorities, and we'll talk about how they ultimately developed a successful project. So highly encourage you to check this out. We'll be recording them and they'll be available after as well if you can't make it. But if you do want to attend live, they all have separate registration links. So please visit the partnership website and you can register for each one of those individually. All right, I think that's everything. We now have some time to answer questions about the partnership and about service provider grants. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see you all, and please feel free to pop your questions in the chat or raise your hand and we can get to those. Any questions? I'm not seeing any. Okay, I'll take that as a sign that the program statement was had a lot of detail, which is great. Let's see. Thank you. Wonderful. Well, I'm available at any point. Please send me an email if you have questions, if you want to talk through anything. Like I said, we'll compile those questions and we'll post them on the website. But yeah, really appreciate your attention today and for joining. I'll hang on for a few minutes to see if anyone wants to talk one-on-one. But other than that, we really appreciate your time today and wishing you the best of luck with your application process. Thank you so much. It was great to see you all. Take care.